Hi, and welcome to InfoSec Pros. I'm Kane, Field CISO at Hyperproof, and I'm joined today at RSA 2025 by Paul Kunas, Managing Global Director of Cyber Risk Regulations and Standards at Accenture. Welcome to the show today, Paul.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm so glad that you made it here as well. What's the best thing you've seen on the show floor so far today?
Whoa. Interesting question. It's got to be the hyperproof booth and your kilt. No one can see your kilt on camera, but there it is.
I'm fairly certain they'll be able to see that in the show somewhere else. So, something we were talking about before we got on was kind of your career trajectory. You were previously working on internal GRC roles, and then you've pivoted to being in client-facing consultant, and you've made that transition from building out Accenture's internal GRC practice to using those insights that you've earned over the years with clients. What's that been like for you? And why did you choose to go from being internal to back external?
Hmm. That's a great question. So it actually started before I built it for Accenture, right? So I started with Accenture a long time ago, back out of school, right? And I was a consultant, was on the road, a road warrior, much more than consultants are road warriors today because a lot of work is done virtually. So I had to, you know, balance my work life, right? So I left Accenture and I took a couple jobs at a couple other organizations, one a big energy company and one a law firm. And for both of those, I set up their internal structure for security. And I kind of leveraged what I learned from being a consultant to taking that internally to um, the companies I worked for. And a big part of that was not just technology based, and it was a lot around policies, driving accountability, the regulations, especially being in heavily regular, um, um, especially being in an organization that has a lot of regulations around nuclear, right? And those bleed back into the business units. So, I really honed my ability of driving through security, getting budgets, and getting backing from leadership by orienting it back to the business and the business risk, not just the cyber risk, right? So that helped me build out a broad program from scratch, policies, standards, but then also driving leadership expectations. And I think a lot of that is based off the GRC, showing where the risk is, the residual risk, and showing the business value, not just the FUD of we're going to get hacked and we need a technology and that technology is going to cost you X amount of dollars. So I came back to Accenture after that period of time and I was ready to take what I learned, from being in operations at these other companies. And now I don't have to worry at night about the breach, but I can help my clients defend against it. But when I came back to Accenture, they said, hey, we have a role internally. So I took that. I expected that to be about maybe 4 or 5 year role. So that's kind of where you kind of reach a breaking point. But because of COVID and because of international conflicts, and then based on both of those, the economies that are out there, um, it was 9.5 years, and but
9.5 years.
9.5 years. But I was able to build out a GRC function in that time, where Accenture, you know, didn't have that because they had just put together their 10 years into 10 years of putting together their security program, which is very related and to the CIO function, right? So technology driven. So bringing in that GRC vision, building that up, all the way across from our third party risk management to insider risk. Um, and then even in our acquisitions. So Accenture is one of the most acquisitive companies in the world, which I guess the universe, if you think about it. And that sounds better. Um, you know, putting into that program. And then after 9.5 years, I've had great team that worked for me and they are all capable of running it, right? And so just thinking about where my career projection is going, I think I have that much more experience in GRC. Now I have the opportunity to take that to my clients help them. I can really empathize with them, right? Because I understand how to do it on a shoestring budget and a very large budget. But not only how you apply that to minimize risk, but then how you present that up to the board and you get them feeling good about your program, or you get them agreeing with your needs, driving budget decisions in your favor. And so that's my story. And I really love engaging now with the client just to talk about them. What are your problems? And maybe explaining to them what they really could do versus what they want to do, or explaining to them what things they need to do that they didn't even know about.
And I love that you talked about bringing your internal expertise to your clients and bringing empathy with that as well. Something I've seen because I used to run executive advisory at a smaller firm, and I found a lot of the consultants who were sending out in the field didn't necessarily have domain expertise in the areas that they were giving advice in. Is there anything that you've found in your time of coaching consultants, senior consultants, in doing that type of work that's really helped them to either learn how to be more empathetic with the clients that they're serving, or alternatively to get an operational foundation so that their recommendations aren't just based in theoretical best practice stuff, but they're actually objectionably correct?
Yeah. The first thing you have to do is listen to the customer, right? You have to understand what they actually need, and try to help them formulate, kind of their explanation of why they need it. Too often, if you're early in your career, you think you have to, it's paint by the numbers and it's not, right? And you have to be able to kind of read through it, and you need to partner with your client, not just, and you can be honest with them, right? We can always bring individual subject matter experts, to help with difficult things. And then we're always honest with our client too. We have analysts which are new and they're building their skills out, but we don't give them the expectation that they have to be the experts. They're going to be the doers. We have experts that are going to work with them to make sure that they're doing the right things at the right time for the right reasons. So it's not always a challenge to say, I don't know, and I'll get back to you. Right. And I think a client is going to realize that I don't know either. Let us know what the answer is. And then I can go in. I can go in with them and talk to the client with them, or, one of our more experienced people. And then sometimes even when we talk about work and we bring in less experienced people, um, we'll have clients that ask for things that we haven't definitely perfected yet. So we'll ask them, we think that's a good idea too. We're developing that. Do you want to go on that journey with us? We can develop it together. That's going to give our people experience. That's going to give them experience to go on to the next client to actually, be very experienced subject matter experts. So, it's like a circle of life. I mean, people are going to know that someone coming in at an analyst level out of school is not an expert, and they have to be comfortable with not portraying themselves always as an expert, but as a partner with the client.
All right, all right. And so let's go up to the other side of the career spectrum. So you've advised boards, I've advised boards. I'm pretty sure there's board members out on the show floor here. There's other CISOs out on the floor here. Something I find a lot of CISOs struggle with, especially new CISOs, is their first board meeting. And there's a whole, I think, cottage industry of content at this point around how to survive your first board meeting because it's scary for some reason. It's not. What are the things that you find really work at this point in translating complex cybersecurity theory or risk theory to board members in a repeatable fashion? Like, what's the advice you give to new CISOs who are prepping for their new board meeting and they've read all the stuff and they don't know what to do still?
So how about not trying to educate them on complex theories? That's a good one. Meaning that they have limited time and they're going to consume a lot of data in a shorter period of time. They're going to have questions ready. They're going to have topical items that they've heard about, right? Either through their other relationships with their peers, or things that are in the news, or incidents that are going on at any one time. So you have to be able to quickly build the context around it. And the context is what's happening in the threat landscape, what's happening internally, what are we doing in general to protect against that, and what are successes against that. Sometimes sometimes the story is not around success. It's around, we thought we had this success, we thought we had this protection, but this happened, and you can't protect against everything. So you have to bring them back into the context of everything that's been done, quickly, succinctly, bring it back into the orientation of how it relates back to the business and how the business is protected or enabled through your controls, and just be real with them. They're real people. They understand the situation, um, and then give them key points of data. Don't give them all the data. I mean, they can't consume it, and you don't have time in that board meeting to cover it, and you're probably going to raise more questions than not. If you go in there with a graphic that has 1,000 red dots and 1,000 blue dots and 1,000 green dots, they're going to ask you to maybe explain those.
But can we also add 2 Y scales and a different logarithmic axis for each, please?
Exactly, exactly. So, yeah, so it's bringing it into context of the business, bringing it in the context of what you talk about, giving them comfort as to how you're controlling the rest of the noise that's out there, and then ask them, "Is this the right level? This is what you want us to come to at the next meetings." Um, I then obviously practice it. Make sure that you're not off kilter with the rest of the leadership that's reporting or what's been reported. But you don't want to over inundate them with data that doesn't mean a lot to them. They don't need to know about every vulnerability on every system. They might need to know your success rate at mitigating vulnerabilities over time that are high risk. That's it. So put it into context. Understand what the board needs and wants. Understand who's on the board as well.
And their backgrounds, I'd
Their
say, as
background,
well.
exactly.
As there are definitely non-technical board members who are probably have a different perspective on risk than you or I might.
Or there's very technical ones, and you don't want to sugarcoat something, and they're going to ask you the gotcha question. So it's just being prepared, but also being human. They're humans too.
I really like that answer, and I wanna expand our lens a little bit because I think we're living through one of those accelerated points of history that, in some future date, we're going to get a very interesting historical write-up on all of the changes that happened in this period of time. But our board members, our other executives, like you said, they're human. They read the news, they see things going on in the world. How do you bring that effectively into the conversation? And I could think of like either geopolitical tension or regulatory changes. I'm thinking especially of some of the extraterritorial regulation that's coming out of the European Union. When you're working with your board, how do you find that as an effective way of messaging to them where they might have left right visibility, but they might not be experts in that domain?
Yeah, so usually you have an opportunity to provide a pre-read, right? And so if you can succinctly put that, and that's the context I was talking about, put that into context, let them understand that these things are happening. I think it's about, if it hasn't impacted you and your company yet, how has it impacted other companies, right? And that's what we need to guard against, and that's why we're having the discussion. So you need to understand why you're having the discussion, but then you bring it back into, we don't want that to happen to us, or it has happened to us, and this is what we're doing to, you know, prevent it from happening or to make sure it doesn't happen again. And if they have that comfort level, you know, that's what you're about. You want them to be, you want them to understand that you have a handle on things. But don't sugarcoat it, and yeah, and it has to be almost headline based with enough context to give that headline some bearing. But the context is important.
So let's talk about something more topical, just and related. There's been an increase in geopolitical tension, predominantly around trade and around tariffs. Are you seeing that at all affect decision making when it comes to GRC program composition for organizations that are multinational or are working in this increased level of difficulty where tariffs? A good example is to contextualize it for the audience here. A friend of mine is a CISO at a company that manufactures stuff. Now, the stuff that doesn't matter, but it involves chips. His board is asking him, what are we doing to move our manufacturing risk because of the tariff risk, the increased challenges, and also some telemetry that they've picked up? But they're asking him questions as a CISO, not as the head of manufacturing, not as CIO. As a CISO, what are we doing to mitigate these risks? Are you seeing similar things in your clientele where geopolitical risk or tensions are driving changes to how we're approaching GRC program composition?
I am, and we're having those conversations with clients today, right? Uh, Particularly, one that's close and near and dear to me is around third-party risk management, so supply chain, and that could be similar to what you're talking about in your example, but not. There's there's a couple examples, but if you, I think you mentioned tariffs.
Yeah, yeah.
So in tariffs, there could be a potential for volatility in suppliers that may no longer be able to get their supplies from wherever they get them because of the cost. That could drive those suppliers to maybe not be able to perform business anymore. That means that you have to have a way in which to quickly onboard or offboard new or old suppliers. Um, and we offer services around third party risk management so that you're consistently monitoring them. Um, and had if everybody was highly mature in this space, they would probably already have it under control, but they don't. So if one of the conversations we're having is how can we make supply chain risk management more effective but more efficient, and it has to be efficient in the case if there is a high volatility in suppliers. So not only do you have to manage your suppliers today and that risk, but now you might get an uptick in things you have to change, onboard new suppliers, and if you have to onboard new suppliers quickly because your old suppliers can't deliver any longer, then you have to be able to do those assessments quickly. And then you have to monitor. You can also downstream monitor their suppliers for impacts to tariffs, and then also they also kind of future-proof yourself for these types of upticks. Because while you're handling tariffs, there could be a major incident with a supplier that's affecting multiple industries. And so, yeah, there's there's ways in which we can address tariffs, right? But there's ways in which we can future-proof or just regular cyber risk that also is going to help you with potential tariff issues down the road.
All right. And I kind of want to bring that back to something you said earlier, because you've worked with organizations of all sizes. You've worked with multinationals. You've worked doing internal GRC at Accenture. You've worked on, I think you said, a shoestring budget. When companies are looking at this fairly complicated situation right now in the world, and they're trying to prioritize, like, what should I do in 2025 and 2026? What are some of the pieces of advice that you could give to companies that are stack ranking their GRC priorities in light of everything that's just, literally the everything that's going on? Because we certainly can't fix everything and we cannot address all of these risks. We can't address all of these challenges. How should companies plan for that?
So when I think about in how I've helped make some decisions in the past, it's all around context of what the issue is, right? So you have to understand what business you're doing in any type of geography where political tensions may rise, who has access there, and what's the actual threat, right? So it might not be personal data. It might be intellectual property. It might be intellectual property just for this company. But the company you're talking about, they have rooted interest in doing business there. You're not going to get out. So you can start with logical controls. How are we protecting it logically? Who has access to the right data at the right time, right? And then you can start going from there. Is that enough? What's the residual risk after we have the right logical controls in place? Now, do we have to start making recommendations for how we have more a physical resilience, right? So that we can continue to work in the event that there is, some unforeseen or even foreseen, conflict in the world. Um, so it might be relocating data or moving data out of a country, but you can go in steps and you can start looking at what's the residual risk, what's the cost benefit associated with whatever decision you make. Um, it's you can't really answer it in a complete answer because it's all dependent on how you're organized. But you can go in very logical steps to determine that. But I think what we did was you just spell some of the risks that you think are there. You understand what data you have and why that data is at risk, not that it's just at risk in general because bad guys here, good guys here. It's not that simple. Clear all that out, target your data, target with logical controls, and then start looking at how you secure physically.
And I love that practical advice there where it might seem overwhelming, but there's definitely a stepwise. And it's a very rational approach that you're giving to our viewers there, where it start with evaluating where your risks are, what your data are, what your regs are, and then decide what can we do based on the budget we have and what's the residual risk and are the stakeholders willing to accept that? Because we can't reduce all of our risks to zero.
That's right. And I go back to your question too, asking the CISO of how they're going to move their manufacturing facilities. That's above. It might be above his pay grade. I don't know. But he should have a voice in it, right? And his voice should be a component of the decision, not the decision. So
I love that. And I love the idea of incorporating those diverse viewpoints as well as part of that conversation because ultimately cybersecurity done well, I hope you'll agree, will it increases business value and it can increase business agility and it's no longer a cost center.
yeah, and the business can make a business decision, but it's an informed decision at that point.
Yes.
So he has to have enough data and enough insight as to what's working, what's not. Yeah, there's a risk of doing business in this country, but guess what? We have these controls that already protect us from that, right? Or yeah, but we never got the funding to put these controls in, so we need that now. Once we do that, then we have some residual risk. Then we can have that conversation.
That's fantastic. Well, I really want to thank you for being on the show today, Paul. And if you're watching this at home and if you know somebody who should be on the show or hey, you're that person who should be on the show, go ahead and DM me on LinkedIn or drop me an email or a note. With that, Paul, again, I really want to thank you for being on the show, sharing your views with our viewership. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me.